On the common link theory, CLT, we will do well to recall the manner in which muhaddiths used to evaluate transmitters, especially their standards regarding tafarrud and wihdan hadiths. Al-Tahanawi stated that tafarrud disqualifies a hadith if it contradicts a known tradition, whether it is mutawatir or mashhur. It is equally important to know that if any transmitter narrated something different than the version narrated by a majority of the transmitters, then this hadith was deemed unacceptable, and his credibility as a transmitter of fard hadith declined among the scholars. In fact, Khatib, who died in 463, dedicated a chapter to this matter in his Al-Kifaya, quoting several muhaddiths, such as Shu'bah, Ibn Mahdi, Ibn Hanbal, Abu Nu'aym, and pointing out the general consensus upon the issue of narrating fard hadith. The credibility of a reliable transmitter is proportionally affected by the number of tafarrud and wihdan hadiths he narrates. There is agreement upon the need to reject the authenticity of these unsound hadiths, but it is left to a muhaddith's discretion to determine the point at which a transmitter's credibility is totally impugned, thus invalidating his corpus of hadith. From a more extreme position, Al-Tahanawi considered all the hadiths from an otherwise reliable but moderately prolific transmitter to be inauthentic if he narrated any shadh or gharib hadiths. In this regard, he cites the example of Muqaddam ibn Muhammad ibn Yahya al-Muqaddami, who was described as thiqa, reliable, by Al-Bazzar, Ad-Daraqutni, and Ibn Hibban. Likewise, Ibn Hibban's biography of Muqaddam in his Thiqat states that Muqaddam narrated shadh and gharib hadiths. Al-Tahanawi concludes that all his hadiths should thus be considered inauthentic. But even for Al-Tahanawi, if a reliable transmitter narrated a few shadh hadiths and was very prolific, only the few spurious hadiths should be considered unauthentic. For instance, Yunus ibn Abul Ala, who was considered a reliable and very prolific transmitter, transmitted some shadh hadiths, and of his entire collection, only these hadiths were consequently declined by muhaddiths. One of the principles of hadith science is that muhaddiths tend to reject the entire narration of a weak transmitter, with excellent examples of this to be found in Al-Madkhal fi Usul al-Hadith by Al-Hakim. Al-Hakim followed the common practice of criticizing not only the text, but the transmitters themselves, and presented 10 classes of weak transmitters. One of the methods that he used was to examine the source from which they narrated hadiths. If their teachers were known for being responsible for fard hadiths, then this would lead to serious doubts about their authenticity. Similar levels of transmitters were presented by Abu Ali al-Ghassani al-Jayani, who died in 498, whom Nawawi quotes in his Madkhal ila Sahih Muslim. However, unlike al-Hakim, al-Jayani's scheme contains 7 levels, 3 of accepted transmitters, 3 of rejected transmitters, and the 7th level for transmitters who are in between these two. In his Origins, Schacht referred to his second form of fard in particular, but he failed to grasp the technical variations and detailed differentiations between the different types that fall under this heading. Within this second type of fard, there are differences in characteristics and validity that can be taken into account. Failure to do so may result in an incorrect conclusion, which is exactly what happened to Schacht. I shall now elucidate the different types of this form of fard, a major subject in the field of hadith, from a critical muhaddith's point of view. The following diagram, 6, depicts the categorization of the fard hadith from a critical perspective of hadith science. Diagram 6, fard hadith. Stay tuned for many more parts.